Hi guys, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to go over the remaining two elder races, the Dwarves and the Jotun. Let's start with the Dwarves, as we have a good source of information in the form of the Tome of the Rubicon. This was apparently written by the Great Dwarf before the time of the human gods, though how accurate this is now is debatable, as it has had to be rewritten and copied over the years due to the degradation of the original. The Dwarven legends claim that they were forged by their god, the Great Dwarf, on Anvil Rock, which is located in the northern Shiver Peaks. And according to the Tome of the Rubicon, in ancient times, whether this means the last Elder Dragon rise or earlier, we don't know, the Great Dwarf faced a creature of vast power and limitless evil, the Great Destroyer, which we now know to be one of the champions of Primordus. The tome also foretold of another great battle to come between the Great Dwarf and the Great Destroyer, in which the Dwarven race would be forever transformed by the right of the Great Dwarf. The Dwarven race laid claim to the Shiver Peak Mountains, though how much of the Shiver Peaks they occupied is unknown, as we know of other races that occupied that same land, the Jotun and the Norn as an example. Anyway, over time, the Dwarves established themselves and became known as the Deldrimor Dwarves. They clearly had interaction with the other elder races, and we also know that when humanity started to spread out, the Dwarves traded with them, but mostly kept to themselves. At some point in time, years prior to 1072 AE, a rogue group split from the Deldrimor Dwarves. This splinter faction became known as the Stone Summit, and eventually the two groups erupted into a civil war. This war lasted until the heroes from the first campaign of Guild Wars 1 helped the Deldrimor Dwarves to beat back the Stone Summit and kill their leader, later assaulting the last stronghold and taking back ancient relics such as the Tome of the Rubicon, where it was later translated and the legends within spread. A few years later, when the earth began to shake and destroyers started to appear on the surface, the Dwarves knew what this meant. Their current leader, King Jarlath Ironhammer, led the Dwarven armies to the northern Shiver Peaks to find the location of the Great Destroyer, and once this had been found, he performed the Rite of the Great Dwarf. This rite, as was foretold in the tome, transformed the Dwarven race into something new. Their flesh became stone, and their minds became linked. They became the Great Dwarf as a collective consciousness, a hive mind with a single goal: to stop the destroyers. This transformation happened to those dwarves with Jarlath almost immediately. However, over time all dwarves succumbed to the rite and underwent their transformation. The dwarves fulfilled the prophecy by defeating the Great Destroyer, and they continued to do battle with the destroyers somewhere in the depths of Tyria. All except Ogden Stonehealer. He works with the Dermot Priory, and has had a fair bit to do with the Last Living Story season. So the question is, will we see more dwarves when we have to deal with Primordus? I'd like to hope so, as they had such a big part to play in the first and last campaign of Guild Wars 1, and personally I'd like to think that there is something big between Primordus and dwarves in some way. That about covers the dwarves, so we'll move on to the Jotun. This race of lesser giants thrive in the Shiver Peak Mountains, and in Guild Wars 1 we assumed they were unintelligent, as they spoke with poor grammar and used rustic weaponry and armour, much like the Yetis and Ogres do. However, with Guild Wars 2 we find out a bit more. Before the last rise of the Elder Dragons, they were a powerful and magical race, knowledgeable both in sorcery and natural philosophy. This is evidenced by their monument stones, rune stones and stelae that contain the recorded knowledge of the stars, earth and the Elder Dragons. This knowledge that we have been able to interpret details a creation myth of the Jotun that speaks of 6 swallowers that rose to wipe the world of life in a series of cycles. These swallowers are presumably the Elder Dragons, which could lead us to believe that they are a cyclic device, as it were, to purge the world of magic or life, kind of like a reset button. One of the most powerful artifacts the Jotun had was the Mystic Telescope. This was also one of the items moved to Ara by the human gods, along with the Bloodstone. This is believed to have been used to foresee the awakening of the Elder Dragons in the heavens, and also how they were able to gain such knowledge of the stars. Like the other races, bar the Mursaat, they gave their magic up to the Bloodstone, and were hidden by glint when last the Elder Dragons rose. What is unclear is what happened next. We have two different stances. The first comes from a Jotun storyteller, who tells us that They, along with the Norn, were favoured by the 6 human gods and granted magic that led the races to prominence. In time, their power came to rival the gods themselves, who began to fear the Jotun would overthrow them. The gods stole the magic back, causing the Jotun to become confused and enraged. They began fighting, leading to civil wars and the downfall of the Jotun civilization. Now, the second version of events comes from Prairie scholars and an old Jotun giant king. In this one, we are told that the Jotun became too powerful and too prideful. They sought to make their own tribes more superior than one another. This is what then brought the tribes into civil war. Pride and greed, not the loss of magic. It's interesting to note that the Prairie scholars also believe that it is this same pride and greed that led them to never marry outside of their own tribes, and that this could be why modern ones are far uglier than their ancestors. Whichever story is true, the Jotun did gain the ability to use magic again, only in its less potent form like every race on Tyria. However, their lore-keepers, sages and mystics had been mostly killed off during the civil wars, resulting in them having no knowledge of the old magic or how the technology they had before actually worked. Over the centuries, this race has declined, leaving only the monuments as a testament to the power that the races used to have. And that about sums up the last 2 elder races. Who knows, maybe in future expansions we will get information about these 2, as well as the others. Jotun would be a good fit for a Jormag type expansion, and of course the Dwarves would fit with Primordus. I hope I've managed to cover everything and not ramble too much, and if you think I've missed anything or would like to know some more, please let me know. Anyway, I shall end the video on that, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Until next time, take care and happy gaming.